Good evening. Welcome to the fourth installment of the Dine and Learn of summer of 2018. It's July 23rd. Thanks again. Yud Bey's Av at night because it's a nighttime. Shikayach to Moish Holzer for arranging this, and to Tzvi Shuali and the Shuali family for sponsoring tonight's dinner. Lilu Nishma, Tzvi's father, Mordechai ben Rabbi Yitzchak, Neshama Sharav and Leah. I ask everyone to stay after this year for the Siyum that Tzvi's going to make, Mitzvah Shem. So tonight, I thought we would talk about something controversial and relevant, and that's the annulment of marriages, which is an issue contemporary. Woman is stuck; she cannot get a get from her husband for usually bad reasons. He's malicious or something like that. And so the question comes, if she can't get a get, can they somehow undo the marriage, annul the marriage, so that she doesn't need a get? She was never married. So it's controversial today. It can be done. It is done today, depending on the circumstances. And it was controversial 500 years ago, the period that we're talking about, right after the expulsion from Spain. So we're going to go tonight. I think we're going to do just a little bit of history, a few stories, a little halacha, and Mitzvah Shem. I don't think we'll have time this week. Next week we'll get to the meat of the matter. It's after Tisha B'Av, so we should have meat tonight also. But I think next week we'll probably get to the real hardcore halacha on this. So on the there should be a few more handouts somewhere. I apologize. The top of the handouts is what happens when you try to do Hebrew in an English word processor. It's an anagram. The letters all got messed up. You can figure it out. Maybe you can't. I don't know. We'll have a contest afterwards. So I told you I said at the beginning, we're going to do a little brief biographies of various Gedolim from those times. We already talked about the Mahari Beirav, if you remember. He was a child prodigy in Spain. He was 17 at the time of the expulsion from Spain. He made his way to Morocco, where at the age of 18 he was appointed a Rav over a very large community. He was that brilliant. He spent quite a bit of time in Egypt. He made really his home in Sfas, where he was accepted as the leading rabbi of Sfas, which itself was an Ir Ve'em B'Yisrael, so that says a lot about him. His two biggest Talmidim were the Mabit and Rav Yosef Karo, who wrote the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, but it's very hard, I think I mentioned this, it's very hard to figure out the timeline of Mahari Beirav, where he was and when. I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and I got stuck on the timeline. Various tshuvas say it's been this amount of time from here, it's this year here, and I tried to put it all together. I couldn't. I reached out to a professor at Hebrew University who was one of the two biggest experts of this time period in the world, and he sent me a few Mar Mekomos and various articles, and then he said, but we really don't, we can't figure it out. This time period, there's just so much that we don't know. So we know the Mahari Beirav was in Egypt for a long time. He was an assistant to the Nagid, right? We talked about the Nagid, Rabbi Yitzchak Shulal, who was a political leader. Then he was in Sfas for many years, and at one point he came back to Egypt, and that's important. This is important for what we're going to talk about tonight, the two Maisas that we're going to talk about. Then there was the Radbaz. Radbaz also grew up in Spain. He was also a big genius. After the expulsion, he made his way to Sfas, where he learned there as well. He came down to Egypt. After the Ottomans, this is important, after the Ottomans conquered Egypt in 1517, Radbaz was made the Chacham Bashi, the chief rabbi. And of course, the Radbaz's tshuvas are very important for halacha. Over 3,000 tshuvas, 7 volumes so far. So another person, so we'll introduce someone else, and that's Haram al-Ashkar. You might be familiar with, in the yeshivas, so there are 2 olives in his last name, but very often that second olive is lost. So in the yeshivas, they call him the Maharam al-Shakar. Right. But you can see right here, it's Maharam al-Ashkar, 2 olives. Sometimes he's spelled with the second olive, sometimes without. Even from those days, it's clear that he's a Maharam al-Ashkar. He was also born in Spain, they think about 1465, which would make him about 27 at the time of the expulsion. He made his way also down to Egypt, and he was on the Radbaz's Bezdin. So when the Radbaz was the chief rabbi, the Maharam al-Ashkar, he was on the leading Bezdin. He was one of the leading rabbis in Cairo, in Egypt. Interestingly enough, the Radbaz was a Mekubal, right, who was one of his Talmidim, the Arizal. The Maharam al-Ashkar was a philosophy guy. He was very Tamar Nevuchim. You've seen his tshuvas. He was very Tamar Nevuchim. It was more philosophy, but they were on this Bezdin together. They were apparently very close. So I just want to mention one other great personality of that time. Maharam al-Ashkar, in the 2 stories we're going to tell, is a major figure. A minor figure is the Ralbach, also known as the Maharalbach, Reb Levi ben Chabib, Reb Levi ibn Chabib. He was, as we've gone through already, he was born in Spain. He was born in 1480, which means at the time of the expulsion in 1492, he was 12. He and his father was Rabbi Yaakov ben Chabib. You would have thought his father's Chabib, right? No. Ben Chabib was the last name. His father was Rabbi Yaakov ben Chabib, who was a big posek in his generation. We don't have any, I don't think we have a tshuva sefer from him, but we have a few tshuvas published in other people's svarim, and the way everybody references him, he was clearly one of the big poskim of his generation. So from Spain, they went to Portugal. Portugal, they were kicked out in 1497 when the Ralbach was 17. Then they went to Istanbul, Constantinople. So in Istanbul, Rabbi Yaakov ben Chabib, that's where he was one of the big poskim of the generation. He answered a lot of tshuvas there, and he put together a sefer we're all familiar with called the Ein Yaakov. He compiled the Ein Yaakov, all the Agadat, all the Midrashim within Shas. He was nifter before he finished, so his son, the Ralbach, finished it in about 1525. So he was 45 years old. He made his way to Yerushalayim, and he was the gadol in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim in those days had about 200 Jewish families. It was very, very difficult life. They were starving. The Ottomans, when they conquered in 1517, right? When the Ottomans conquered in 1517, they put an extra tax on the Jews in Yerushalayim, and many Jews left. They couldn't financially live, and that's why Tzfas grew to be such a huge Ir V'Aim, the city of Talmidei Chachamim. But the Ralbach, he toughed it out. And he stayed there, and he was the gadol in Yerushalayim. That's important for our stories. So, 1516. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. So that's referring to Tripoli in Libya, but there's also Tripoli in Lebanon. So at that time, in Lebanon, there was a Jewish community of about 800 families, and there were these two brothers who had children, and they wanted to marry their son and their daughter to each other, first cousins. It's not so crazy, first cousins. My wife's grandparents, one of her said, they're first cousins, and it was, keep it in the family. Why look outside? So I know we frown upon that nowadays, but in previous generations, not too long ago, it was very standard. Hasidish, even Sephardic in Tripoli, in Libya, in Lebanon. So the girl's name was Yakuta, and the boy's name was Pinchas. Yakuta was 9 years old. Pinchas, I assume, was a teenager, probably 13, maybe a little older, and they were first cousins. And the fathers decided we should marry them off. So nowadays, we frown upon marrying off a 9-year-old daughter. I mean, it's horrifying. Those of us who have daughters understand how horrifying that is. But in different times, it wasn't so horrifying, because in many places and times, that's the way you protect a girl. A teenage girl was ripe to be captured and sold as a slave. You marry her off before she's a teenager to protect her from being captured as a slave, especially if you're a Jew, you're a minority in a Muslim country, and some Muslim cultures have multiple wives and female slaves used for that purpose. Even today, it's in the news. So that's how you protect your daughters. So they wanted to marry her off at the age of 9.
They respected the fact that women who were married were off limits, even back then.
Just like in Chumash with Avram and Sarah. Avram said, tell him I'm your brother, because if you say I'm your husband, they'll kill Avram so they can take Sarah. So why wouldn't they just take Sarah? And even if it, because marriage meant something. Adultery is a problem. A slave, a female slave, so they'll take that.
But you just gave an example to counter that. I'm not here to argue.
No, the Chumash is like that. They wouldn't take her as a married woman, so they kill him to take her as a widow. But killing is, that's how bad Mitzrayim was. That's how bad they didn't care about killing.
I'm talking about in that time, though. In that time.
Oh, so if she was single,
Right. So
if she was single, they would capture her. If she was married, they wouldn't.
All right, that's the standard. So
They wouldn't.
Okay.
Also, the lifespan was very short. That's why they married younger also.
So the lifespan was shorter, and for financial reasons as well. Women couldn't work in those days, so the only way they could guarantee that she'd have an income, if anything should happen to the father. I'm not in favor of child marriage. I'm just trying to explain why they would marry her off at the age of 9. So 15, 16, they got married. What happened a year later? 15, 17? What have I said already? The Ottomans conquered Lebanon and Israel and Egypt. So 8 months after the wedding, the Ottomans came and conquered Tripoli. When there's war, there's havoc, people die. things are destroyed, people are taken captive. The Pinchas was taken captive back to Turkey. Rumor was that he converted to Islam and assimilated into the population. What does that leave 9 or 10-year-old Yakuta and Aguna? She can't marry. It's tragic. 10 years old, her life is ruined. So over time, and within a few years, she and her father make their way down to Cairo in Egypt. She lives as an Aguna for a few years. And then in 1523, so that's 7 years later, so she's about 16. She's already an old lady, she needs to get married. So her father comes up with an idea, and he approaches some rabbis, a Bezdin, and he says, I never approved the wedding. Because when Kiddushay Ketana, when you marry off a young girl, so she cannot accept the marriage proposal on her own, the father has to do it for her. So the father said, I never accepted it. And so he's talking to the rabbis, and they have this long conversation with the Bezdin, and he has witnesses. And the witnesses say, so some of the witnesses say, I was there. The father was arguing with his brother, right? Because remember, the bride and groom were first cousins, fathers or brothers. He was arguing, and he never agreed to the wedding, to the marriage. Some other witnesses say, I was there, and he absolutely agreed. He celebrated with everyone else. And the rabbi said, wait a minute, what's going on? You're trying to pull something. But the conversation had gone on for so long, it was already at night. You cannot accept testimony. Bezdin cannot accept testimony at night. All the testimony was invalid. So the next day, or within a few days, the father went to another Bezdin with his witnesses. And this time, they all had the same story. Their stories were aligned. The father never agreed to the wedding. So these rabbis, so the original rabbis are screaming, Gewalt, do not believe them, they're lying. They're lying. But the second Bezdin, so they reach out to the leading rabbis of the entire country. They spend 2 years talking to witnesses, and they conclude she can marry. She was never originally married. She's free. They annulled the original wedding original marriage because the father never agreed to it. Still, the original Bezdin said, you're crazy. You're permitting adultery right in front of us. She marries. She has kids. So around 1525 or so, she marries, she has kids. Maybe 5 years later, the Mahari Rav comes back to Egypt. And the Mahari Rav, we've spoken before, he was a genius, he was bold, and he was not scared of anyone. So the Bezdin, the original Bezdin, who were very upset, and who thought this woman was living in sin, and her children were mamzering, they're illegitimate. So they called over the Mahari Rav, and they said, you will not believe what happened while you were gone in Sfas. This is the story. So the Mahari Rav was no fool. He said, okay, let me talk to the other rabbis. So he went to the Bezdin that permitted her, and he had a long conversation with them. And he left the conversation convinced they permitted adultery, and all her children are mamzerim. Again, he was scared of nobody. So he went to the husband. He went to the husband who married Yakuta, the second husband, or second or first, that's the question. And he said, you're committing adultery. I'm gonna resolve this. I'm gonna get more witnesses. I'm gonna find out what actually happened. You must leave the house immediately. You cannot remain without wife. So the other rabbis, the leading rabbis of Egypt, said, no, we permitted you to marry her. We will put you in cherem if you leave that house. Because I assume they're worried about the kids. The father leaves for a few months. And then they clear it all up, and he goes back. But you know what? That stain will never leave those kids. And they were convinced they were right, so they said, we will put you in cherem. So the Mahari Rav issues a call throughout the area for all the survivors from Tripoli, from that battle in Tripoli, all the survivors who remember the wedding. He issues a cherem unless they come and testify before him. Anyone who remembers the wedding must come and testify before him. And he goes on a journey to Yerushalayim, to Gaza, to Damascus, trying to get the testimony. And the whole time, he's taking the testimony, he's writing it down. Right? They didn't have photocopies then. He's writing it down, and he's sending it to the original Bezdin in Egypt, right, the strict one, and he's sending it to Yerushalayim, to the Ralbach, saying, please relay this to all the rabbis in Egypt, the lenient ones, the leading rabbis, make copies and send it out. Right? So he's basically using the Ralbach as his secretary. And the Ralbach was, he was one of the Gedolim, and B, he was not foolish enough to get involved in a controversy like this. You don't stick your nose in there unless you have a good reason. So he was very reluctant to get involved. And so this is wild and crazy what happened. So the Rabach apparently only summarized the testimony, sent it to Egypt, and it was so incomplete that it was confusing, and it actually accomplished the exact opposite. And they found many holes in the testimony because it was just a summary. The Rabach himself, as he was leaving Gaza, of all places, was mugged. Yeah, he was robbed. All his belongings were taken, including the testimony. So he had no records of the testimony. And to add to this, the original Bezdin in Egypt that he had sent it to, they lost it also. Nobody knows what happened to it. All the testimony disappeared. So the leading rabbis in Egypt said, we don't understand. You sent us summaries of testimony from 4 people. Of these 4 people you sent us testimonies for, 2 left Tripoli years before their wedding and obviously are not testifying what they saw. They weren't there. So the Mahari Rav was still convinced. He got the testimony. He spoke to the witnesses. He was convinced that there was a real wedding, and 800 families celebrated this wedding in public. And how could these rabbis in Egypt say that this wedding was not good when literally the whole city of Tripoli celebrated it? If the bride's father didn't approve, why were 800 people celebrating it? So the Mahari Rav wrote tshuva, explaining the testimonies, arguing in favor, giving all sorts of halachic arguments about edus. Good. So then one of the Dayanim from Yitzrayim wrote a tshuva back, and then that only got the Mahari Rav angrier, and he wrote another tshuva, and then the Maharam al-Ashkar and the Radbaz got involved. The Radbaz was the chief rabbi. The Maharam al-Ashkar was apparently one of the rabbis who permitted Yakuta to marry. And they wrote tshuvas the Radbaz wrote a respectful tshuva. Maharam al-Ashkar, not so much. He was not so happy with the Mahari Rav. If you look at source 6, so this is actually for the second story we'll tell. But the Maharam al-Ashkar has some choice words for the Mahari Rav. He said, at one point he says, Mari de Avram, Mativo Shalchacham Zeh. The God of Avram, who is this guy? He doesn't know the basics. Well, Mr. Hashem will talk about this. So the Maharam al-Ashkar was very upset. So the Rabach, just briefly, we're running out of time. I'm telling you the story for too long. So the Maharam al-Ashkar said, all the testimony that the Mahari Rav took is invalid. I'll go to Yerushalayim and take my own testimony. So he goes to Yerushalayim, the Rabach sits with him, they take testimony from all these other people, and every single one of them said, the father didn't agree. The father didn't agree, therefore she's allowed to marry. Meanwhile, the Mahari Rav, what he got was the 2 fathers had a fight. Then the leader of the political leader of the Tripoli community, Sheikh Basin, I think it was called. The Sheikh is the official title. He sat them down and said, here's what we're going to do. We'll make peace. And they agreed. The night before the wedding, they agreed, and the wedding went on, and the father was happy. So it's all a big confusion. We don't know how it ended. Mistama, they remained married, because the chief rabbi of Egypt said they could remain married. But the whole story just seems so funny, seems so weird. Because fine, okay, the details of the testimony was given at night, but where's your common sense? And that's what the first Bezdin was saying. Where's your common sense? We know these witnesses are lying. Why are they lying? Because this poor 9-year-old girl, her life was ruined when the Ottomans conquered Tripoli. And unless all we have to do is say the father didn't agree, and suddenly she gets her life back and her kids back. That's common sense tells me that's what happened. So what's going on with the Maharam al-Ashkar? So presumably he was saying, you know what, we don't know if this guy's alive or not. This Pinchas, her husband. We don't know if he's alive or not. And we have so many sfegas. It's an aguna. So in aguna, we tried to be more lenient. That's what I would have thought. But if you look at the tshuvas, they don't mention aguna at all. That doesn't come up at all. So what I think happened, what I think they were thinking is, they came to a bezdin. We permitted her to remarry or to marry. So what's she supposed to do? She did everything right. So unless we have 1,000% proven case that we were wrong, we're ruining the process. So the Mahari Rav can't prove al pi halacha that she is not allowed to remarry. So then we're not going to overturn the decision. That's my own speculation. I really don't know. But what happened was Lamaisa, the Radbaz and the Maharam al-Ashkar, invalidated or annulled a wedding, so allowing her to remarry and have kids. It happened. Okay, so let's go on to the second case. We're running out of time. I apologize. 1527. In a courtyard in Egypt, a girl comes out of shul, or a girl is outside shul. Man comes out in front of two witnesses, gives her a ring, and says, "Take this as kiddushin for me." The exact language was, "Tikchi ze bekiddushin li." She accepts it. Two witnesses see it. Another two witnesses come forward and say, "Wait a minute. This was supposedly happening as he came out of shul, entered the courtyard. She was there, and two witnesses were there. We were in that courtyard, sweeping up. The two witnesses were outside the courtyard, not inside, because we were getting dust all over them and told them to close the gate so that we don't get dust all over them. We were there from when the girl's father went to shul and when he came back from shul. So this never happened." The young man's name was Shmuel, and the girl's name, the young woman's name was Ordiania.
She was a katana?
She was not a teenager.
So you mentioned the father came out of shul.
Oh, no, the father didn't want her. Oh, so hold on a minute. Hold on.
Okay.
So then a third set of witnesses came forward and said, "We also were there in the courtyard and we saw it never happened." So the third set of witnesses is important because one of the witnesses, his name was Yosef ibn Gabai, and he took it on himself to travel up and down Yerushalayim, Damascus, Tzfas, to go to all the Gedolim there to try to get a psak that the original marriage of this guy giving the girl in the courtyard never happened, and therefore she's free to marry. So he saw the Mahari Beirav in, we think it was Tzfas or Damascus. It's not entirely clear where the Mahari Beirav was at that point. But the Mahari Beirav listened to this. The Yosef ibn Gabai had all the testimony that was presented in Bezdin with the stamp of the Bezdin. He showed him the testimony. Mahari Beirav wrote up a tshuva saying she's free to marry. What he didn't know was that the rabbis in Egypt had forbidden her to remarry, insisted that she get a get from the first man before she remarries. And who were the rabbis who did this? Our friend Maharam al-Ashkar and the Radbaz. And so when they find out that the Mahari Beirav gave him a tshuva saying she's allowed to marry, so Maharam al-Ashkar, he blew a gasket, and he wrote a tshuva to the Mahari Beirav saying, "You don't understand, you're in Tzfas." So first of all, one of the Mahari Beirav's issues was that he didn't say "Harei at mekudesh li b'tabazo," right? That's unambiguous. What he said is, "Take this from me as kiddushin." Kiddushin what? Maybe he wanted her to hold it as kiddushin that he should give to another woman. It doesn't actually. He's not actually clearly, unambiguously saying you're married to me. So the Maharam al-Ashkar said, "What are you talking about? They're teenage sweethearts. The father refused to allow them to marry." And so the guy snuck and found her. The father was trying to keep that teenage boy away from his daughter. And when the father was in shul, he quickly found her and gave her the kiddushin. And in that context, it's pretty unambiguous what he wanted. He wanted to marry her before, a few days later, she was supposed to get married to Yosef ibn Gabai. So the Maharam al-Ashkar says, you're not here. We're here. We know what's going on. So he said, not only that, if you go to the courtyard and you look, where those two witnesses said we were in the courtyard the whole time, we saw there was nobody there, where they were standing, they can't see the gate. They don't know who's in the courtyard and who's not. So the Ralbach in Yerushalayim said, Yosef ibn Gabai, he came to me also. So first he didn't want to get involved, but eventually he got involved. They dragged him into it. Because the Maharam al-Ashkar was so harsh against the Mahari Beirav, Ralbach said, you know what? Okay, I got to defend him a little bit. And the Ralbach said, he came to me and I said she needs a get. She needs a get. She's not allowed to marry the first guy, and she's not allowed to marry the second guy either. The Ralbach was the strictest possible opinion, and that was obviously Yosef ibn Gabai was not happy with, so he went to someone else. So I promise you we do a little halacha, not just stories. And we have a source sheet, which we haven't even touched yet. So one of the Mahari Rav's arguments is that they said it all happened, the second set of witnesses, it all happened while the father was in shul. And so if you look at the first, it's just from the Mishnah Torah, it's really a Mishnah, but again, a Gemara, just the Rambam says it very clearly. Amar echad b'shlosha v'asheni omer b'chamisha. So if two witnesses contradict each other, one says it was at 3 o'clock, the other says it was 5 o'clock, edusam betela. We can't accept it because there's a contradiction. They're 2 hours apart. Obviously, one of them is wrong. Amar eid echad b'shtei shos bayom v'asheni omer b'shalosh shos. But if one says 2 o'clock, the other says 3 o'clock, so then harei edusam kayemes. So that's good. We accept it. They don't have to be exactly the same. To be 1 hour off. You know, they didn't have watches then. And even today when we have watches, you know, we don't always know exactly what time it is. Maybe now with cell phones everybody's glued to it. But Rosh Chodesh.
Right, that's in Rosh Hashanah also.
That has to do with the size of the moon, right? What do they see?
When did you see it?
What time did you see it? Good. So the way the Mahari Beirav reads this is that if it's an hour and a half or less, round down, and we could say that they're off by an hour and a half. So how long does shul last during the week? Less than an hour and a half. Maybe in Mitzrayim they said extra tehillim and had a shir afterwards, but even still, it was less than an hour and a half. So the fact that the second set of witnesses said we saw it the whole time and this didn't happen, well, yeah, they could have been off by an hour and a half, and they wouldn't recognize it, but we still accept the testimony. So maybe both sets of witnesses are correct. So the Maram al-Ashkar replies back, wait, okay, that's if we're just talking about time, but we're talking about an event. The second set of witnesses said he went to shul and he came back, and the first set of witnesses are when the guy came out of shul. So even if they're davening at different shuls, it's still tied to an event, not to a time. So they are contradicting, and therefore you have a problem. You can't accept them both. So the question then comes, are they Eidei Hakchasha or Eidei Hazama? Eidei Hakchasha are when a set of witnesses contradict what another set says. And then you're left with a stalemate. You don't know who to believe. Hazama is when a second set comes and contradicts the first witness in a different way, which we'll explore in a minute, in which way you only believe the second set and not the first set. And that makes a big difference here. Do we believe the second set? Or do we say it's a suffix? So if you look at the source 2, so what's the difference? Ein eidim nasim zomamin ad sheyazumu it's atzman. You only become eidei hazama. This is, I think they call it confutation as opposed to refutation. So confutation, eidei hazama, is only when they're on the people themselves. Ketzad amru me'idin anu b'ish ploni shehorag es hanevesh. We testify. So the original witnesses say, this guy killed someone. So Amr Lahen, Heyach Atem Idin. How could you testify that he killed him? Shari Nerag, Horeg, so either the victim or the accused murderer, Haya Imanu, also Hayam. He was with us. So you clearly didn't see it happen because he was with us. So Ein Elu Zomamin. That's not Eidei Hazama because they're not testifying on the witnesses, they're testifying on the event. But if the second set of witnesses say, how can you testify? If you, the witnesses, the first set of witnesses, were with us, the second set, on that day, so you clearly didn't see it, that's Eidim Zomamin. So the question is, so the Mahari Beirav says that the second set of witnesses are testifying that the first set of witnesses were not in that courtyard. We saw the courtyard the whole time. You were not there, so therefore they're Eidei Hazama. And then Maharam al-Ashkar replies back, what do you mean? No, they're saying that the actual Kiddushin didn't happen. We watched the courtyard the whole time. The boy never gave the girl the ring. So it's not Eidei Hazama, it's Eidei Hakchasha. And therefore you had a stalemate, and there's a suffix, and she needs a get. So what's the debate? So I'd like to tie it as follows. I'd like to explain as follows. So if you look at source 3, this is the Rambam, and the Rambam adds something very important. Ma bein hakchasha lahazama. What's the difference between refutation and confutation? Hakchasha be'edus atzma. So hakchasha is on the testimony itself. We'll skip a little. Ve'hazama be'edim. Hazama is on the witnesses. Be'edim atzman. Ve'elu ha'edim shehizimum. And the second set of witnesses. Einan yodim imniya hadavar olohaya. They don't know anything about the actual event. They're only talking about the witnesses. The Rambam says Eidei Hazama can only be about the witnesses and nothing else. So in our case, Maharam al-Ashkar is correct. Because they're on both. They're saying the witnesses weren't in the courtyard and the Kiddushin wasn't in the courtyard. So that doesn't fit the Eidei Hazama profile that the Rambam gives. But look at the tour. We'll just skip to the third line. So Sha'omrim, also Shah, Shatem Omrim Shalava, Hayusim Imanu, right? So when you say that the loan here is talking about a loan, when the loan happened, you were with us. And therefore, we believe the second set of witnesses. Since they're testifying on the actual witnesses themselves. Vahavi, now he's explaining. Vahavi ki'ilu heidu alein shehargu hanefesh shechilu Shabbos. They are testifying on the original witnesses as if they killed someone, or they're Mechal Shabbos, or in some way they are invalid. They're saying you're not valid witnesses. You're invalid witnesses. And once they say that, once they invalidate the first set of witnesses, the first set of witnesses can't say, no, we disagree. No, you're wrong. It's too late. They're invalid. They don't have a response back. Lomar, lo asinu kach v'kach. No, that's not true. We weren't with you. It's too late. They're invalid. Their testimony is not believed. So the Lechem Mishnah says the Rambam and the Tur are disagreeing on the following. It's source 5, but we won't go there. Is the law of Eidim Zomamim a chiddush of the Torah? Why should you believe the second witnesses and not the first? There's no reason. It's just the Torah says that's how process we follow. That's the procedure. Really, the order, it's just a coincidence. It just happens to be the second set came last. But there's no real logic behind it, and it's a chiddush. And therefore, the chiddush only applies to the bare minimum that we know about. And the bare minimum that we know about this law is that if they're only testifying on the original witnesses. Anything more, that's outside the chiddush of the Torah, and we have no reason to believe the second witnesses over the first witnesses. But the Torah says it's a svara. The Torah says there's a logic behind it. And if the logic applies even if they're testifying on more. So in our case, the Mahari Beirav follows the Torah, that Eidim Zomim is a logical halacha, and therefore it applies in that case as well. While the Maharam al-Ashkar follows the Rambam, that it's a chiddush of the Torah, and we follow that chiddush only as far as we go. So we're totally out of time. I apologize. And Yirtzeh Hashem, next week we'll continue with this. So we saw two cases where they annulled, or they tried to annul marriages. Even 500 years ago, it was a machlokus. You couldn't even solve a simple get, even if the chief rabbi of Egypt, on cases that happened in Egypt, he still couldn't be the final word, and it ended up in a machlokus. So Yirtzeh Hashem, next week we'll talk about more and how the machlokus continues.